The earth rises back up out of the sea, green once again. Initially, there's some dispute about where the light comes from because the stars all fell. My thought was, who's lighting this scene? It's like, is this all black? What's going on? But there's a deep forest, and a man and a woman survive there. The children of the gods survive, and creation begins again. There are some indications that Balder, who died, but his death was the beginning of Ragnarok, comes back up out of the land of the dead. He was a god, sun god, so he's radiating light and gives light to the new world. There's also some suggestion, because this is an area that was taken over by Christianity not long as these stories are all written post-Christianity, that possibly this is really just an acculturalization, a use of Jesus' resurrection myth put into a Viking structure. I'm nowhere near the student to be able to address those issues. But it does mean that I don't want to tell that story. You can go to a bookstore and buy a million different books like that. So I'm doing my story a little differently. But it's after the main part of the stories. So I can read all this stuff and keep track of it. But then I'm talking about a part where no one's gone before. So I don't have to worry too much when people say, well, this wouldn't have happened. And I can say, well, none of it's happened. It's just a story. So that works out. But I do try to keep some sense of at least my understanding of a Viking culture and a Viking ideal. Without being, you know, I'm a child of the West. I live in America. I have my own, I came out of what I know here. But I try to inform my stories with that sort of thing to make them, you know, to make them interesting. Just I'd like to tell good stories. And everything I do, I used to teach class at School of Visual Arts. I used to just comics. And I had 3 rules, which I kind of forgot. One of the rules was, use reference, which is kind of the information thing. Because a lot of kids when they do comics don't use reference to start with, and it looks like that. One of the ideas is that everything you do, to me, and I still use it, should be about your story. Every decision you make should be a story decision, which is including, I mean, somebody gets, well, do I use 5 lines or 12 on this drawing? Well, that's not always a clear answer if you're thinking, just making my story better, or making it worse, or making it about the same. But you get some guidance from that. 12 panels on a page, 5 panels on a page. I need a large interior splash right here to show this. Can I do it in 3 panels? But that's where reference, I think, comes in. And the idea is you're trying to make your story better. And you are, as I said earlier, you're balancing a lot of different things, trying to make the stuff work. But that's what all of us do. I'm probably more casual than the rest of the guys up here on the...
Well, I like what you said about the research that you can teach.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I think. Comic books, my main purpose is to entertainment.
Yes.
But it's also can use as a teaching guide. One of my books, Grass Cutter, took about 5 years to complete research. It starts off with...
Oh, you're making me feel way better.
Well, it starts off with the creation of the Japanese islands and follows the gods and the creation of man and everything. And that took about 5 years.
That just came out as a giant book, right?
It came out as...
If you guys haven't seen it, you should go. IDW published it as a giant book. You should totally go get it.
Yeah,
it's a great story.
A ton of awards. It's used in college classrooms. But the other thing is that, you know, like I said, it took a long time to research. However, I could not put all that research into the story because, like you said, the story comes first.
Yeah.
And that's why I started doing these bibliographies in the back, story notes that tell us more about these aspects of the stories that I touched upon. But
I did that when I was doing Thor for Marvel, and I used to write the letter columns. I wrote them in Marvel's editorial voice, but I would read all the letters that came in. I would write letters, and one of the things I put in one of the books, in one of the issues somewhere, I put a bibliography of books about Norse myths for that very reason, because I wasn't doing the direct Norse myths, but there were several books I read. 2 or 3 were really favorites of mine, and there were a lot of other ones I thought if you're interested in this stuff, you want to know more about it, these are books you should go out and take a look at.
And you gave Thor his goats, huh?
I did give him his goats. I gave him the wrong horns. I'm so pissed. I missed the reference on that. I gave him sheep horns and not goat horns. I didn't know enough at the time. I did hear about that. One of the guys at the convention came up with a couple of Xerox sheets of all these different drawings he picked up from different places about how goat horns went. And he gave these to me. So if I ever drew them again, I'd get the horns right.
As Paul said,
I still feel bad.
They're always going to be. And
I still feel bad about that.
Those were magic goats. They had
They were magic.
different horns.
They had magic horns. Yeah, well, I should have made them morphing goats. The horns just
I was just
morphed
gonna
the
say
back
metamorphosis.
erect horns later.
And the idea of research versus story reminds me of the conversation we had about why Cirrus is Cirrus and not the actual
yes, right.
word for a Norse witch.
Right.
Which sounds an awful lot like a female body part. But that would distract, yes, that would distract from your story. So
Right.
you figure out a way around.
I don't know, it might sell better. I thought about it.
Did-
It's interesting that you said that the elements should always serve the story. And right now I'm actually taking a TEDx class on public speaking. And in that, you have 8 to 12 minutes. You have a huge message, but in anything that you say, whether it's, to emotionally grip the audience, for entertainment value, from facts to personal stories, you have to question, does this serve your message? So if you have a standard floppy of, 22 to 23 pages, anything you put in there, everything has to be of value. So you have to deduce it to the things that are going to serve your story best. So like you said, you can't sit there and over-calculate research, and then people who go into it blindly are like, well, that was boring shit. You have to make sure that, you have an equal balance of everything. And that's the number one question, I think. Does it serve your story? Does it serve your message and what you want to do to the audience?
I will say one quick note. The third rule I try to teach my kids, you get my entire class in like 4 seconds. The third rule was simply that doing comic books is a lot of work.
Yeah.
And if you want to do the work, do some other line of business. So that was, because you get people come in and Mr. Simonson, I did these 40 pages in my hotel room last night, and I know you guys work really fast in comics, and they look like 40 pages down in the hotel room at night.
On bar napkins?
Oh my goodness. And in the beginning, I was doing about a page a week, and I had $45 a page for pencils and inks in 1972. And I don't know.
That's what they get now.
It's gone back to that. But I am faster now than I used to be.
Any questions? Pretty sure
We've answered everything.
If not, I've got more questions. I was just going to let people. Okay, I'll just go. So how comfortable, talking about your research, for the sake of story, do you feel changing some of these myths and legends and things and putting your twist on it? Paul's excited. Okay, go Paul.
You were talking about the creation of Japan mythology. I did an adaptation for a school and library publisher. They focused through the school and library market of the story of Amaterasu. And one of the things in Amaterasu is her brother gets very angry and he skins her pony, her favorite pony, and throws it into her sewing hut. And we looked at this and said, because we're aiming like 8 to 12-year-olds, it's like, okay, it's going to be disturbing enough that a horse comes flying through the hut. We skip the skinning.
And all the women are so traumatized, they commit suicide.
And again, there was, and we did not go into, when I did the Hercules myth, we did not go into the fact that his 12 labors were because he had been poisoned and then killed his entire family. So we had to kind of tweak things a little bit for modern sensibilities. A lot of parents would not have been happy if their 8-year-old went, he did what?
I will say that I find that maybe a difficult question, and partly because I don't know, now there's a lot more effort to shield children from stuff than there was, say, when I was a child. I don't know that I turned out badly from not having been shielded from a lot of that kind of stuff. Of course, there's a lot of other stuff now that children have to endure that I could never imagine having a lockdown in my elementary school because some guy's got a gun and has come in and started shooting. I mean, it's just a different world. So the lessons I would have learned a million years ago, I'm not sure they're applicable now. But one of the things that I did read, I used to read I read every kind of comic when I was a kid. I didn't care. I read Cheyenne, based off television, Sea Hunt, Superman, Batman. Didn't find the Marvels were a little bit later than when I was a kid. 77 Sunset Strip. None of these will mean anything to you guys. But they're all old comics. And a lot of them based on media. But I read Classics Illustrated. And I read Frankenstein. Don't remember the name of the writer. There was an artist, the artist, a penciler and inker, a guy at pencil, a woman who inked it. I don't remember their names. The guy had some comic books. It's very strange drawing. It's not very good drawing in some ways, but it's very disturbing. And he is the perfect artist to have done the Frankenstein comic. There's one shot of Henry Frankenstein who's having brain fever, lying with his head flat on the panel bottom as if it's the floor, and his head is almost as wide as it is high, because that's the way he just drew it. And other shots where it's vertical, you got the proportions closer. And really, it kind of looks like a guy with brain fever. Would look something like that. But I found that there's a scene in the movie, in the book rather, it's a pretty straight adaptation of the book, and for those of you who haven't read it, there's a young woman who's a nurse, not a nurse exactly, but she looks after she has a small child in her care. And she goes, they're out in the hills, somewhere out in the fields, and she falls asleep, and the monster, who's not really evil in the sense, the ordinary sense of evil, finds the child, and the child starts crying. He's holding the child. And what I'm remembering, I may be wrong about this, is he puts his hand over the child's head to keep it quiet, and he ends up strangling or suffocating the child, kills the child. And there's a locket that the child has that he finds very pretty. He takes it along, and then he finds the sleeping girl. I think her name was Justine. And he finds Justine, and he puts the locket in her pocket. And she is convicted of the murder of this small child. They're charged, and she is hanged. And in the comic book, as I remember, she is hanged. Now, it may be a silhouette shot. I don't remember well enough now. But there's a foreground, and there's the noose. It's like, I don't know if my parents, if they'd seen that, I don't know if they would have done anything or freaked out. I can't imagine how that would go over now with a 10-year-old or the parents of a 10-year-old. I will say, I found the comic so disturbing that I burned it in our fireplace. I put it in the fireplace, and I put fire to it, and I took the poker, and I pushed the pages apart so they would all burn equally.
Did it make shrieking
Until there was
noises?
nothing but ashes left. I bought a copy later as an older guy, so I have a copy. But it was quite potent. As I said, not the world's greatest drawing, perfect for Frankenstein. I could not draw anything as disturbing. And I'm not sure Bernie Wrightson would have. I mean, Bernie did a beautiful Frankenstein, but there's so much beauty in his work, even the monster stuff. This is just not beautiful. It's just kind of ghastly. But it isn't like Graham Ingles. It's just the way the drawing is done. But it was really, so I don't, when they talk about not showing kids this stuff, I'm not showing a skinned horse either. I don't know. But it's interesting because, the world, well, just for me, it's not really a nice place in many ways. And I'm not sure that trying to keep kids safe from the stuff that's going to be going down in their lives eventually is necessarily a wise idea. I don't know. I have no answers for that. I just know the world is different now than it was when I was a kid. And the thing, maybe because it seems to be worse, maybe we try to shield our children more before they get old enough to learn about stuff like that. I don't know. I mean, it's a deeper question than I have the brains to resolve. But I will say, when I was a kid, I got a lot of that stuff. And I didn't go to scary movies. I went to see this movie that was scary when I double billed when I was 10. I had nightmares when I got home. So as far as my mom was concerned, that was the end of seeing scary movies to me until I was 30. Or there.
Anything to add? What about you? What about changing you changed the name for
Yeah.
purposes. So how comfortable are you, how far do you go?
I think I'm comfortable enough to introduce new elements to it. I like to keep things fresh. I like the idea of combining traditional, mythology with things that are new. Because I'm like, well, they did it, why can't I? I feel pretty comfortable. I just think it makes it more fun, and that's what we're here to do with mythology, is have fun. I feel pretty comfortable with it because I know if I'm having fun, then the reader is, and just makes it more, pleasing aesthetically and readership-wise as well.
Because a lot of myths are the retelling of this, and they change over time. So this is just a
this is a big game of telephone too. So how are you to tell me I'm wrong?
Yeah.
And it's funny. I grew up on watching whatever my dad would show me, which was Conan the Barbarian or Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things. I think one time I showed my niece, she came up to me and she said, she was describing a film that her and Grandpa were watching, and I said, he let you watch Event Horizon? He's like, yeah, we fast forward through some of it, she can handle it. But I grew up with the Aliens franchise, and here we are.
That explains a lot.
Yeah, I know, like, here we are. Here we are. I'm all right.
I will say that the movies I was scared by were really, they weren't terrible movies, but they were made for about $1.50. They were really, I mean, one of them was Earth versus the Flying Saucers, with Harryhausen, which was really cool. I mean, the Flying Saucers are great. A lot of the special effects are pretty cheesy. But it was that. There was another one just called The Werewolf, I think, which was cheesy, but actually not a bad little story. But they try to combine science fiction and werewolfism.
That was the one where he turned into a werewolf because of the radiation.
The bad scientists were trying to create a human being that could survive in a post-nuclear era, and they got a werewolf. Beats me. But there were still aspects, but it had the tragic quality of many of the werewolf stories. It was kind of moving. I mean, it's a cheap jack film, but the werewolf himself, the guy that played the werewolf, did a nice job. They're all kind of minor actors. A couple of you'd recognize from character roles back in the day. But they were, he was a victim, the way werewolves are in traditional werewolf stories, just not of being bitten by a werewolf. It's a different mechanism to get them there. And it had a sad ending. It was not, everything didn't work out in the end, which was probably as much of a nightmare for me as anything I was watching. So it was pretty neat.
That's interesting too, talking about changes and things. We think of the traditional werewolf movie, the one in the popular consciousness now is the tragedy. But like a lot of the old werewolf myths and legends were, oh yeah, somebody figured out a spell to turn themselves into a werewolf so they could take revenge on their and some of those I've read some of those and they don't sort of have the same potency as the tragic thing. So again, that idea of the traditions and the myths and the legends and the folklore are often best used as a jumping off point.
That's true.
To look for a way to tell the story that you need. So we need to hear more from you, Stan.
Yeah.
About werewolves?
About anything you want. About how comfortable you are with changing.
I change things a lot. It's whatever fits the story. But like I said, I also have the story notes that tells or gives a real story. In my Mythology series, like you said, like Paul says, I'll use the myth as a jumping off point, and I can change things. In Yokai, I created my own creatures, and no one's mentioned anything about that. Hey, what is this? I don't know. It's like Totoro. Totoro's not a part of Japanese mythology as far as I know, but
it will be
now. Yeah,
it is now. I want a Yasagi Junmo story about that bouncing umbrella or whatever it was you mentioned earlier. There was some umbrella thing.
In Japanese,
if you haven't done it.
No, Japanese mythology or Japanese belief is that when an object reaches 100 years old, it becomes alive. And that's why you find very few secondhand stores in Japan, because you never know how old this bottled water is, and next year it starts spreading those crop legs and start running around. And they have
I want that umbrella story. I totally want it.
But they have a lot of stories about inanimate objects that have come to life, the dancing tea kettle, or like I said, the umbrella, or the shoes that just walk by themselves.
Cool. Very cool.
So we're almost out of time. Any final questions? Not? Any questions? None. Come on, man. Wait. Okay.
I always kind of thought comic books are our myths, kind of like our modern day myths. And one of the big roles of myths is teaching societal norms and be a good guy, don't be a bad guy, that sort of thing. How much of that do you take from traditional stuff, and how much do you just insert it yourself into what you write now?
Gee. Nobody else is jumping in here either, huh?
Well, you know me, I'll jump in on
Go right
anything.
ahead. Why don't you start?
It's interesting because, you know, even the definition of heroes have changed from, like we're talking about, with the Greek myths when I was doing the Hercules stuff. When Greeks were talking about heroes, they were talking about exceptional people, not necessarily morally exceptional. Theseus was smarter than everybody else. Hercules was stronger than everybody else. Agamemnon was sneakier than, or not Agamemnon, Odysseus was sneakier than everybody else. Agamemnon just had anger issues, as I remember. But, yeah, you wouldn't like him when he's angry.
Hard to blame him.
Yeah, well, true. And so it's, I find it interesting when you're approaching, you know, I've done, obviously not like to the degree that Walter has done. I've done a little bit of mainstream comics, and you have to kind of look for that idea of what is culturally, what is a hero. I was just on a panel about depression and creativity, and we were talking about how like mental health issues used to be like oh hey, the villain is crazy, that's why they're bad. And you know, thankfully we're evolving beyond that, where people are kind of trying to look at things more closely. So it's really difficult when addressing comics as modern myths, especially when you're jumping off of the traditional mythology, to see what to portray, the traditional version of heroism, the modern version. Is there a standard modern version? You just kind of have to do what feels right. And like Walter was saying, Stan and Kasey, what works for the story that you really want to convey. So.
I will say, one thing that does happen, I think, maybe in writing, I hadn't thought about writing as much as drawing. I was teaching, and I have 20 students, and we get portfolio reviews. And one of the questions you get sometimes is, well, how can I develop a style? Like you have a style, Stan has a style, Jack Kirby, how do I get a style? I would get that in class sometimes. And the answer was, I had college students, most of the answer was, well, really, you already have one. So I'll teach, after the end of the semester, I'm going to be able to look at any page without a name on it from anybody in this class. And I'm going to be able to say, this belongs to Bill, or this was Johan's, or this is somebody else. Because your style is already there, the idea is you want to get better. Not at your style, but better at drawing, better at storytelling, whatever it is. But whatever you are, it's already there in the art. And your job as an artist, in a sense, is to bring that out. And I think this is probably true in the writing. When I write stories, I mean, to me, myths, real myths, not the crap I write, but real myths, what that really is about, what they really served culturally, was they were there to answer really difficult, unanswerable questions about existence, about life, about lots of things. I don't aspire to that in my comics. I don't think I can. So I try to write stories that are entertaining. I base them off some of that stuff. And then whatever it is I write, I have done it long enough that I'm confident it will reflect whatever I am. If you know enough about my stories, you're going to go, oh, this has got to be a Simonson story in the stuff I'm doing. And hopefully that'll be a part of me, my relation to society, whatever that happens to be, as well as the information I've researched, the stuff I've read about, the stuff I swiped from Stan, you know, whatever it is, stuff I'm going to be swiping from Paul, maybe Kasey down the road. And so I try to get that worked in. But at the end, in a way, I'm an entertainer. I don't want the stories to, that's about all I can really say about it. I just want people to enjoy it. And I have had people who have occasionally, or so has Wheezy, my wife, who's written a lot of comics, who've had difficult times in their lives through one way or another. And they'll come up and say, you know, your comic helped get me through a really difficult period. And I'm thinking, you know, it's like being a songwriter. You write your song, you send it out there, And then it means stuff emotionally to people that you have no idea what it will mean to them. You set it free, and once it's out there, it has its own life. And that's kind of the stories that we tell. They have their own, once we set them free, they have their own lives. And you hope they live a good life, but that's about the best you can hope for.
And I think too, no matter what story you're telling, whether it's based on mythology or not, not to take any integrity out of the subject matter, what we're talking about, but I learned this a lot when it came to branding and sales, and direct sales especially, when people would compare, you know, a comic book to a different sort of brand. So no matter what story you're writing, there's nothing new under the sun, there's just different ways of doing it. And once you own that, it speaks to the reader that much more, because I didn't see, you know, like let's say Nora, for example, somebody said, oh, this reminds me of Dreamscapes. You know, I had never seen Dreamscapes before. And I said, you know what, if that's what you got out of it, that's great. Because I know some other people would be like, well, it's really not intended to be like that. Like, don't say that. Like you said, once you set a thing out into the world, how it affects a person, the only thing that matters is that it affected them. And once it's out there, it's for the world, you move on to something else. It is no longer yours, and that's the intention. You cannot, you know, hold on to it that long. And, you know, we have to remember that that's why we're writing stories, is we're not writing it with, you know, we're not spoon-feeding a reader and saying, this is what I intend for you to feel. You know, you just write it with feeling, and it will speak to people.
I do want to own it long enough so my check will clear
Right.
when I'm done.
You get paid for this? You guys get paid for
A little.
And on that note, we are out of time. Thank you to our... and have an amazing Baltimore Comic Con.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.